It's my pleasure to introduce Tom Steyer, our keynote speaker, who will get us off to a great start. Tom is the founder of Farallon Capital Management, where he built a highly successful and very well-respected investment firm. Farallon is headquartered in San Francisco, has a global reach, and a blue ribbon client base. Tom led the development of Farallon, its business, and its investment management for more than 30 years, with a very high level of success that has passed the test of time, a very important metric in the investment business. In 2012, Tom retired from Farallon to devote himself full-time to reshaping how we generate energy and how we use it, and working to encourage the political system to respond to the threat of climate change. As a member of the Board of Trustees at Stanford University, Tom and his wife, Kat, founded two renewable energy research institutions that are housed at the university, the Tom Katz Center for Sustainable Energy and the Steyer Taylor Center for Energy Policy and Finance. Tom also founded Next Generation, which addresses energy and children's policy issues. He's also chaired political action campaigns to protect and strengthen advanced energy policies in the state of California through various ballot box initiatives in that state. And he supported the election of candidates for political office with positions that are favorable to enlightened energy policy. So Tom is a passionate energy advocate, and in that capacity has created two other important organizations to advance the cause. The Advanced Energy Economy, which advocates on behalf of a better business environment to nurture the development of advanced energy businesses around the country, and the Advanced Energy Economy Institute, which is the educational and charitable affiliate of AEE. It's through his advocacy work for new energy businesses that we at Clean Tech have come to know and work with Tom. And it is in his role as chair of the Advanced Energy Institute that Tom is with us today. Tom and his wife and 4 children live in San Francisco. He clearly could be in many places today doing many things. Tom, thank you so much for choosing to be with us today on this beautiful day in Chicago. Please join me in giving Tom a very warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Amy. Thank you, Nick, everybody here. It is actually a great day to be in Chicago, and I'm really excited about it. I am Tom Steyer, and about 2 years ago, I was sitting in an office doing a job I really liked, being grossly overpaid to do it, and life was very good. And for reasons that sometimes escape me, I now have a job where not only do I not get paid, but I actually spend a lot of money, and I travel around, and occasionally people attack me for my positions. So the question really has to be, why are you guys sitting in those chairs today, and why am I standing up here doing this job? And I think the answer is actually the same. From my point of view, energy is the challenge of our generation of Americans. I think that it's fairly standard for a generation to have a specific test, and you think back through your parents' generation and your grandparents' generation, and there was always something that Americans had to stand up and do. And at the time, it seemed questionable of whether they could do it, but in retrospect, you look back and ask how people performed on that challenge. And that's why I was willing to leave a job that I loved, doing something I had done for 30 years and could fool myself into thinking I was remotely competent at, to push on something where I really felt it was open-ended, but I felt completely compelled to go and work to try and remake the way America generates and uses energy, because I feel like in 50 years, that will be the test of how we as Americans have performed. So I'm actually thrilled to be here in a business plan contest, because it actually speaks very well to the way that I think about how we're going to solve this problem. I did go to Stanford Business School a long time ago. I'm class of 1983. And I'm a firm believer in the idea that business solves society's problems. that basically the idea of a business plan is that we're going to have innovative, creative people coming up with new ideas to solve problems in a way that works for all of society, and they're incented to do it, and that's the private enterprise system, and that's the system I believe in. But I don't believe that that's the only role that business has to play in American society. I think the basic point that I'm going to try and make today is that business isn't only the engine that solves problems, but it's an essential part of the advocacy to make sure that the policies are in place so that business has the right incentives. So let me take you through that logic somewhat circuitously. I think the first thing to acknowledge right now about energy is when we think about climate, the scientific debate is basically over. I think there are people out there who'd like to keep this debate alive as a way of freezing us in place and keeping the status quo. But if you look at all the scientific evidence, I'm not a scientist, I basically have to believe that when 97% of the scientists are sure about something, basically I'm going to go with the PhDs, not with the non-PhDs. And I think that that's actually becoming fairly well accepted in our society at this point. I think the days of science denial, overt science denial, are pretty much dead. I think it's still possible for people to say they're not sure and use the cigarette tactic. I'm not sure if nicotine is addictive. I'm not sure if cigarettes cause cancer in the energy context. But I don't know if you guys noticed, but yesterday Exxon acknowledged the science and said it was time for responsible policies to deal with the risks. I think that if you really look at what elected officials are saying, who really don't want to change anything in energy, they've stopped denying the science, and they're now saying, we really just don't know. We know we need to deal with the outcomes, but we don't really know what the causes are. And if you look at the polls of Americans, they basically agree with us, which is to say, they know that the climate is changing, they believe it's caused by human activity, and they even agree that the policies should change in the broad way that policies have always changed to take account of pollution. The problem is, and the reason that that's not having any impact in the political system is, they actually don't care. So they'll agree on a poll, 67%, roughly 2/3 of Americans will agree with everything I said, but if you ask them to rank where it counts in terms of the importance of issues to them, they don't rank it very high. And when you think about the American political system, what counts is not your opinion, but your vote. So unless you're willing to change your vote on an issue, your opinion actually doesn't count, because what elected officials respond to is votes, not opinion polls, because that's actually what counts in November of 2014. So really the job at this point is to change the priority for Americans in thinking about where energy stands. And I'll give you an example of why this is true. I was talking to somebody 2 or 3 years ago who ran a $12 billion hedge fund, lived in New York, so went to some very, very fancy schools, had a graduate degree, so someone who you would think would be all over this issue. And I said, are you worried at all about energy? And he goes, no. I said, well, do you think about climate at all? He goes, no. I said, it doesn't factor into your thinking at all? No. And he said, Tom, look, I live on the 17th floor. I have a refrigerator full of food. The water's never going to reach the 17th floor, and we're not going to go hungry. I really am not worried about it. And I was sitting there thinking, okay, when the electricity goes out, how are you getting to the 17th floor? And when the electricity goes out, the food is all going to rot, and what are you actually going to do for food? But I think the point of that story is, when you think about this in terms of the people of the citizens of the United States, they're thinking about it in very personal terms. They're not, even the people who you'd think of as extremely well educated and thoughtful and smart are thinking about this in terms of how does it hit me and my family? And until we get down to that level, we're never really going to change this debate. But the other thing that is great about today, the thing that's great about this contest is, the one thing I've learned in business is every really big problem is a huge opportunity for businesses. So when we think about this problem, which I think of as our generational challenge, it's global, it's the biggest industry in the world, it's the biggest problem in the world, that means it's the biggest opportunity in the world. So when we think about how much is going to change, how far these business plans can go if they're really right, the answer is incredibly far. And the other thing that I've noticed, just being here for a day, people in Chicago are extremely proud of this city. And they feel that actually, in terms of being a center of real changes in the United States, it's never happened without Chicago. That really, people can talk a lot, but the center of this country is actually the center of this country. And that isn't going to happen with a few people on the coast making a decision. It isn't going to happen until the people of the United States make a decision to make a change. And that's actually what I believe. So I am extremely happy if the people of Chicago decide this is something really important. Because when the people of the United States decide to sink their teeth into this and put in place policies that make it possible for businesses to go as far as possible, then we will succeed in this. I have no doubt that we have the capability to succeed. Today is a beautiful example of that to me. But what I actually believe is that we have to decide that this is a high enough priority to make us make the changes so we can do what we're entirely set up to do. I mean, people talk about 3 things that need to change for us to really solve the energy problem. And they think about it in terms of technology, finance, which is just we need a ton of money to make these things happen, and policy. And I know that today is really about technology. It's really about innovation. It's about taking new ideas and turning them into realistic activities. But the one thing I want to remind you of is technology actually doesn't just happen in a vacuum. So I want to draw a comparison to the telecommunications business. So I was born in 1957, and they broke up Ma Bell. They broke up AT&T in 1983. So my parents were living, they were not particularly technologically sophisticated. And in 1983, they were using a rotary phone. And they were basically using a phone technology that had been around since Alexander Graham Bell. They didn't have, they had a phone and a TV, and the TV wasn't a color TV. They broke up AT&T. In 1996, they deregulated the telecommunications industry. And today, it's not just that my parents wouldn't recognize a single telecommunications instrument, they wouldn't even be able to speak the language. Everything has changed in 30 years. There have been thousands of innovations. The big companies that have been created are created anew. They're very young. We have forgotten how young the companies are that have really led the telecommunications revolution. And that is exactly what we would expect from a textbook at Stanford Business School, which is you set it up in the policies so that people can innovate, and American business innovates in a way that no one expected, better than anyone expected, shockingly good. And that has actually been what's happened in pollution as well. So right now, it's not easy. It wasn't easy to break up AT&T. Monopolies don't like to be broken up. The energy companies are not begging for clean energy to come in and displace them. The utilities are serving a function. They're not sitting there saying, please make us unprofitable. That will never happen. So in order for this to happen, we actually need to have policies put in place for a level playing field. But the other thing we also need, and I think people in this room need to remember, we actually need the US government to invest in the R of R&D. We need research dollars in this area. I think ARPA-E is one of the great things that's happened in the United States. I think it's been a huge success. I think the defense spending on research has been incredible. If you really remember who funded the internet originally, it was the Defense Department. So industry doesn't really make 20-year open-ended bets of tons of money. No one really does that. It's too far out. That is not the model for even the most foresighted American industry. They have much higher discount rates and shorter timeframes than that. So it's really going to be important. One of the things we need is a lot of government money to spend on that. I think John Doerr once said, we spend more money on potato chips than on research for advanced energy. That actually, I think, is statistically true. And we're going to have to do more if we're going to have the kind of innovation that we need. I'd also like to point out, from being here for a day, that this is a place where Chicago can absolutely participate. From what I can understand about what's going on in storage and batteries here in terms of research at the Argonne Laboratories, I think this is a place where it can be, something where Chicago leads, where the technology is centered here, and where you get a cluster of excellence. And that's actually how I think this is going to work, that different parts of the country are going to be excellent at different parts of this and build up companies around specific technologies where they both compete with each other and feed off each other. And I think that's really important. I think it's going to be based on having great research institutions, having good business people, and having good policies supporting them. So that is something where I honestly feel we're used to that. I mean, I live in the Bay Area. We're used to the idea of clusters, that people who are in specific areas work together and are fiercely competitive, but also reinforce each other and people move back and forth. And that is the kind of thing that I think can happen here and probably will happen here. When I listen to Amy talk about almost 100,000 jobs, this is the kind of thing where this is going to be the job creator in my mind for the United States of America. When we talk about what is the huge job for all of us, for our generation, that is going to put a ton of blue-collar people and white-collar people to work in well-paying jobs, this is going to be it. It is very hard to look at what we need to do and not realize that we need to rebuild and build a lot of things, and we need a lot of new ideas. And between that is going to be a huge number of jobs. So one of the things that always gets me annoyed is when people say, well, we're either going to do this fossil fuel project or we're going to lose this many jobs. I'm always thinking, it's not like we're going to do that fossil fuel project or nothing's going to happen. There is another way for us to provide that energy that is going to create a lot more jobs. They're going to be American jobs, and that's going to have a lot more legs than doing one more hole in the ground. Let me talk for 1 second about finance, because people worry about finance in this area. This is a gigantic industry to start with. And unlike IT, it can be super capital intensive. So we're talking about an amazing amount of money, really, to get this all done. And I think there's a term in clean tech, people talk about the valley of death, that you can do the startup part and then you run into a place where there's a shortage of money. I have never worried, having spent my life in the global capital markets, I have never worried about us being short of money. I think that there is an absolute shortage of dollars, and the absolute shortage of dollars has to do with revenues, not investment dollars. To me, I believe that we have the best capital markets in the world that will aggressively go out and finance things that they believe in. I don't believe for a second that there is a shortage of money. I think there's a shortage of confidence that there will be revenues there to support the investment. So when I think about that, I also think about that in terms of policy. They have to know that there are going to be revenues there, because you're not talking about a little bit of money. To build some of these things is hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. Right now, advanced energy is a $1.1 trillion global business. It's a huge business right now. It grows at 2 times the world growth rate. The US is 16% of that, which is higher than it was. It used to be 10%. It's growing at 4 times the US growth rate. So when people talk about it's either going to be jobs or the environment, that is an absolutely false dichotomy. That is not our choice. In fact, that is people trying to explain to you that American business cannot succeed, that if we're going to do the right thing, it's going to be at the expense of our economy. That is not true. The way this will work is, if we push on this, we will innovate and create new things that will be much more job intensive, and I hope much more profitable, and we will be energy independent. All of these arguments make me completely crazy. But I come back again. If you look at the wind industry, it's been a roller coaster. And it's been a roller coaster of investment and activity based on a tax credit. So the idea that energy is going to be separated from policy hasn't been true in the United States for at least 100 years. And you can see it, as I understand it, you can see it right now in Illinois in the way that some of the RPS is working here. But it is absolutely standard operating procedure for the government to be involved in energy in every part of it, and has been for a really long time. So that leads me to policy. And I've been saying policy has to lead. It doesn't have to lead for us to do well, but it has to lead for us to have a level playing field and for us to ultimately solve the problem. Now, I know level playing field is a sexy idea. As a Stanford business student, probably the course that everyone hated the most was cost accounting. Because, it was the driest, most boring course that everyone had to take in the first year and that they dreaded, and it's difficult. But the fact of the matter is, the sexy idea that I'm up here pushing for is complete cost accounting. That if everybody pays their costs, then you let businesses, you basically fully cost everything, and you let businesses compare all the different ideas and put the money into the things that work the best with full cost accounting. If you don't have full cost accounting, if you leave out costs, businesses will do a very good job of optimizing, but they will optimize the wrong thing. It's the classic computer idea, garbage in, garbage out. If you put in the wrong numbers, you will do an absolutely perfect equation, but you will get the wrong answer. So if we don't include the costs of health, if we don't include the costs of the impact on our climate, then we're really giving people a free subsidy. And that's all it really accounts for. And people, don't get me wrong, people love free subsidies. When you're making a ton of money off a subsidy, you will fight really hard to keep it. And that is what we're seeing, and that's what we should expect to see. But that doesn't mean that what they're doing is in any way defensible. If you look around the world, we're not the worst. There are $500 billion a year of direct subsidies for fossil fuel usage around the world. Many governments subsidize their citizens to burn fossil fuels, which is incredible. So, I have been doing, I don't know, Tim alluded to this, I have been doing a lot of straight-up politics over the last 15 months, which has been a great education for me. I'd done a little bit before. And I think we're going to have a few questions afterwards, and I'm perfectly happy to address any of them. But what I really wanted to address is 3 things that we're doing to try and push from a business standpoint to get the kind of framework in place so that business can succeed and be allowed to be the engine to solve this problem. The first one that I'm doing a study with Hank Paulson and Mike Bloomberg to see what the cost is to specific geographies and specific industries in the United States of not dealing with our climate issue. So we're going to look we generate energy locally, we use it locally, the problems are local. Every time we generalize to the United States, I think we lose everybody's attention. I know that Hurricane Sandy in New York was a big deal to the people in New York, and I don't want to be cynical, but it was not a big deal to the people in San Francisco. The drought, I was at a dinner a couple of years ago when the Mississippi was really, really, really low. And I was at a dinner with 8 people, and I asked them, are you guys worried about the Mississippi? And 7 of them were, why would we be worried about the Mississippi? And I was like, well, do you know all about the drought? And it's really running low, and people are very worried about its ability to carry the kind of traffic. It's still a huge waterway for the United States. I'm like, no. But one guy was from St. Louis, and he told me his mom called him 4 times a day to say, what do you think about the Mississippi? And she was terrified because St. Louis was built to be the city on the Mississippi River. So when something happens in Chicago, the people here are absolutely riveted by it, but weather is really local. So when we think about this, we want to be able to show that this is something that we can bring down to a specific business so that businesses will pay attention. Mike Bloomberg loves to say, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. We want to really be able to show, here is a very high quality study of what will happen to businesses in this industry, in this region. So people start to take in to what they're going to be facing, what they're going to be dealing with. So that's one thing we're doing. The second thing that we've been doing is there's actually something called the Sustainable Accounting Standards Boards. And the idea is, in the public market, every material fact is supposed to be disclosed. And so some of the material facts that aren't being disclosed have to do with the kind of emissions or different sustainable things that are going on. So the point about SASB is to say, let's have full disclosure. All we're going to do is let investors and the public know what the contingent liabilities are of your business and let them do with it whatever they want. Because the fact of the matter is when you're running a public company, your job, your charge, your value is trying to provide value to your shareholders over the short, intermediate, and long term. People really care about that. They are not pretending to care about that. That's what they get paid on, and that's where their pride is. Their pride is in doing a really good job on that over a long period of time. And unless something is included in that calculation, they may care. I'm not saying they're not good, solid citizens, but their job is to make sure they're delivering value to their shareholders over the long term. And when information starts to come out that affects that, they will absolutely respond. Because that is something that they absolutely live with. So that is the second thing we're trying to do, is make sure just that the information is published and that it is done in a way so that it is comparable between companies, so investors can think logically. They may not care. My friend who runs the $12 billion hedge fund in New York explicitly told me he doesn't care, but there are people who will care. And the third thing that I've been doing, which Tim alluded to, is I co-founded something called Advanced Energy Economy that is a partner with CET. And basically the idea of AEE is that there is no business voice that speaks for all of clean or advanced energy. You know, there is a wind association, there is a solar association, there are various groups, but they don't speak across for the entire industry. And there's an old saying in Washington, D.C., I'm sure you guys have heard, which is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And it's actually true if you think about it in your own life. I have two brothers, and if only two of us showed up to split up my mother's apple pie, my mother happened to have made great apple pie. But if two of us were splitting it up, you could have been sure that the third brother got a very small piece of pie. And I promise you that in the energy area, if you don't show up at the table, if you don't represent your interests, you will get somewhere between a small and no piece of that pie. You know, if you go back and look, I was reading a great book this year. I was reading the last part of Robert Caro's biography of Lyndon Johnson. And they were talking about the Texas delegation in the 50s. And in Texas in the 50s, they would go to people who were running for the Senate, and they didn't care if they were Democrats or Republicans. They didn't care if they were from Kansas, Oregon, New Hampshire, or Florida. If they would support the oil depletion allowance, they would hand them a paper bag with $25,000 in it. Absolutely. And they were absolutely serious that you lived up to it. Because from their point of view, that was something that was essential for their profitability. They wanted to be at the table. They were not only wanted to be at the table, they wanted to own the table that the conversation was being had at, and that's always going to be true. So we feel at AEE that we need to be organized, but in addition, it's really a local issue, so we need to be organized state by state. So we started this 3 years ago. It's actually run by a very polite, quiet killer who's the former mayor of Fort Wayne, Indiana. Who's a really, seems like a kindly, polite grandfather, is actually relentless competitor. We're in 23 states. We think we'll be in 29 states. CET is a very good partner for us. We're very proud of what they do and really happy to work with them. But we feel that in terms of energy regulation, you know, it's largely state by state, particularly in electricity generation. And so if you're going to be effective in Ohio, you better have an organization that understands the problems, the people, and the politics in Ohio. And they certainly do not want to hear what the wisdom is from on high in California. There is no question that if you're going to be effective in a state, you not only have to be from that state, accepted in that state, but in addition, you have to understand the specific problems and the details. When you really get into PUC regulation, what happens on page 67 is really important. You can't do this, you know, just from 30,000 feet. I have a big opinion. I flew in on Thursday. I flew out on Thursday night. This is something where you really have to be detailed. And that's really what AEE is trying to do, is they're trying to be a national organization, but run by the states. And so 2 of the things they're trying to do right now, one is the new EPA regulation about power plants is going to be actually implemented on state plans. So they're working in the states to try and come up with good plans so the states can meet those EPA requirements that will be promulgated in June. And the second thing they're trying to do is there are a lot of technological challenges to the utility model. You know, when I was talking about the phone company and saying that my parents would have been very happy with Alexander Graham Bell, last night there were a couple people in the energy business who were saying that they'd be very happy with Thomas Edison. You know, we're at a place where the changes really are going to have to come to the utility model, and we're not doing away with utilities. We're going to have technologies that are going to challenge that model. We're going to have an ability to do new things. We're going to have a requirement to do new things. And it's not as if we're going to go from A to B in one day, and it doesn't matter what's there now. What's there now is very important. It's going to have to be adapted. And so they're trying to work with regulators and utilities and advanced energy companies to try and come up with a model that works for all of them. I did leave my job. I actually think in this, not only is it this generation's challenge, I also think time is pretty short. And I'm reminded of one of my favorite movies, which is Chariots of Fire, and there's a Scottish runner who's a great runner. He's in the Olympics, and his trial to get in the finals of his race is on a Sunday, and he's extremely avert. He won't run on a Sunday because it's the Sabbath. And so they call together the British Olympic Committee, and they decide that actually maybe he can run a different race where the trial isn't on a Sunday, but he's not qualified for it. He hasn't competed in it. He hasn't won a place in the trial. So they're sitting around, and one guy says to the other, well, it's a good idea, but we'll have to call the committee. And the other guy goes, you idiot, we are the committee. And that's the truth in energy. You know, I'm 56 years old. At this point, the people in this room, we are the committee. There is no group of people in our society who are going to take care of this for us. If we wait for the Congress of the United States to solve this for us, we will wait a long time. The fact of the matter is, the people of the United States, business people, responsible citizens, are the committee at this point. And until we actually accept that and take up that mantle, this will not get solved. So my ask for you today is, I know that the people in this room are working on a daily basis on this problem. I know that you guys are, in effect, the soldiers in this army pushing us in what I believe is not only the right way, but the necessary way. And what I'm really arguing for is, for us to win, if you go back to technology, finance, and policy, you guys are all working really hard on technology, trying to make business the engine for change, which it has to be, and which I applaud, and I'm extremely happy to be here with you. But I'd ask you, don't worry about the money, because the money is there. But you also have to participate in the policy, because until the rules are really right, we may do well, but our companies won't be able to grow the way they really should. We'll be fighting with one hand behind our back, and we really won't be able to do the full job that is necessary for us to transform the energy economy. So thank you very much.
We only have time for one, maybe two questions because Tom's got a flight. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and he's going to find somebody to ask Tom a question.
Hi, Tom. Mil Ovan from Navitas Systems. We're a battery technology company. Nice to meet a fellow traveler born in 1957.
You old man.
Yeah, well, I'm doing all right. We'll do the secret handshake later. I've spent a lot of time as an entrepreneur at companies like Motorola working on discontinuities. And these discontinuities, if solved, would last 50 years or more. I see us with cellular, wireless email, wireless LANs, and the like. And I've been involved in clean tech for the last 14 years. The challenge is, and having spent time also in Silicon Valley for a couple years, is that Motorola, Silicon Valley, we always worked on the really tough challenges and made big bets. And if you solve those, those discontinuities would last 50 years. We're now in a phase where there's kind of a clean tech hangover. Investors understand that the gestation periods are a lot longer than they expected. And the finance community is kind of looking for the next WhatsApp, $16 billion for 50 employees. So how do we get back to investing in those tough clean tech challenges that if we solve them, that'll serve our generation for the next 50 years and beyond?
Well, let me reinterpret that question so that I can remotely answer it. I actually think as an investor, this is a really different business from IT. Because if you look at WhatsApp, if you look at the IT businesses, they're basically software businesses when you really get down to it. And software businesses are infinitely replicable. So the cost of adding one more customer is basically nil. And so when you think about that from an investment basis, you don't need very much money. It has, huge legs. And you can basically have a venture capital. It fits perfectly. It really is the basis for the venture capital model, which is you make a lot of bets, you blow up a lot of bets, but if you make a few good ones, they carry the whole portfolio. That actually isn't the way energy works, because when you really think about an energy investment, it's capital intensive. The next customer may be relatively cheap, but building the plant is very, very expensive. You're talking about a lot of money. So people don't like to risk hundreds of millions of dollars and have it be, well, it turns out the 15-year-olds just didn't like that application, so we're done. So that's why I was saying, I don't think there's a shortage of money. I think there's a shortage of revenues, because you have to know when you build that plant that there are going to be revenues on the other side, because people will finance high-quality revenues, high-probability revenues for a lot less money. So when I think about energy, I feel as if the money is going to go into projects where you have contracts to sell energy, and you know what's going to happen on the other end, and then they will be financeable at much lower returns than venture returns, because you're not going to blow up. So when I think about this from a financing standpoint, it's actually a different business. The way that it works is going to be really different, and what you're going to have is much higher probabilities for more money and lower returns. So I actually think that everyone loves the venture model. I don't think the venture model I think it's going to work for certain things, but in terms of the big dollar plants, I don't think so.
One more question.
Tom, Craig Sieben Energy. A year ago, I saw you speak with George Shultz right now at the Wall Street Journal's conference, Economics. I'd like you to give us a little update on how the flaming liberal, Mr. Shultz, he had a remarkable set of presentations and discussions about thinking that the climate change issue should not be political, or should be bipartisan. What inroads has he made over this past year? And could you give some insights on where you see his leadership as we approach this election coming to your political work?
Well, I'm sure most of you guys know him, but there might be a few people in the room who George is 93 years old. He's had 4 cabinet positions. He worked in the Eisenhower, Nixon, and Reagan administrations, and he lives in San Francisco and is affiliated with the Hoover Institute at Stanford. Does an enormous amount on energy, co-chaired 2 propositions with me in California, and I hope I'm not flattering myself too much, I think is a pretty good friend of mine. I really, really like and respect George. He is a fantastic guy. He is a very proud Republican, and the reason we co-chaired these props together is we felt that this has got to be a bipartisan issue, that until we pull together business, both parties, organized labor, and people of all kinds, we're not going to win this. And it was very successful. George is continuing to be extremely active in this. I see him regularly. He is one of the people who is working on risky business with Hank Paulson and Mike Bloomberg and me. He has a very simple attitude. I mean, sometimes George will get mad at me and he'll say, Tom, why are you doing all this political junk? We all know we just need a revenue neutral carbon tax and a lot of money from the federal government for research. And I will say, George, I know that. But I'm not sure how to get that so simply, so I think there's a big political fight. He is, I think, pulling together policy people, certainly at Hoover. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with Hoover, but it actually is one of the leading, or maybe the leading, conservative economic voice. It's definitely in the top 2 in my mind, and I think they've got some fantastic economists. They're very data-driven, and George is a great leader there. He's not the head of it, but he's a great leader, and there are a number of really, really outstanding people who work at Hoover. So I think he is pushing behind the scenes for that. He writes a lot of op-eds to that effect. I think he used to be on the board of Chevron, so he's very, well-known in fossil fuel circles and respected. He used to be the president of Bechtel, so he brings a whole lot of heavy industry with him, and he is, as a result of working, in high level in the United States, he has an awful lot of friends in high business and government places who respect him. Now, having said that, so I can pull together, Hank Paulson is another person who's very straightforward on this, and there are other Republicans who I have enormous regard for, and who I basically agree on this, to a very great extent. The problem is, on a partisan basis, it's hard to find elected officials who are free to say that publicly. And so George doesn't have to worry about getting reelected. And last I checked, Hank Paulson isn't really worried about his reelection. And there are a bunch of other friends of mine who I consider to be extremely serious Republicans, incredibly successful people whose, opinions I think are well worth listening to by anybody who agree on this topic, but they're not elected officials. And so when you look at the elected officials, there's a huge partisan gap on this. And one of the things I actually think Republicans have moved away from climate denial by and large in the last year. So I think there's progress. I think they're at the sort of climate agnosticism place. And the question is, how do we get them to a place where they feel comfortable that they're not going to be attacked, they're not going to lose their job, doing something that I think in their heart of hearts they know is right. And we're not there yet, and that's a big political push, but I think it's one that is essential for us ultimately to get to the end where everybody in the United States is on the same page. And the reason we have to be on the same page openly, the reason that I feel like this is not a secret choice, this has to be one that we discuss openly and are frank about and convincing about, is because this is a global problem. And if this isn't getting solved without the United States as an essential leader in the global coalition to change energy policy. So you don't change the world secretly. You don't go overseas and say, please don't tell the American people what we're doing. The American people are smart. What we need to do is be convincing to show why this matters, because they know we're right already, they just don't know why it matters. And when that happens, you really can't get elected without doing the right thing, then I think, there's an old saying from Hemingway, how did you go bankrupt? 2 ways, slowly and then all at once. And I'm hoping that the way this gets solved is just like a Hemingway bankruptcy, slowly and then all at once.
Wow. Tom. Bravo. Bravo. Tom, we are so proud to be your soldiers in this fight. And thank you so much for your courage and for standing up and inspiring the industry. But thank you so much for coming to Chicago. Please, one more round of applause for Tom Steyer.